Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of OP Radio. We have another great show lined up for you today. A very special show with some very special guests. The topic of today's show is RetroPGF Round 3. So we put out some big news about this yesterday, and today we're going to talk more about it with two people who know a lot about it. Speaking of which, let's have our guests introduce themselves. Bobby, do you want to go ahead and go first?
Sure. Hello, fam. My name is Bobby. I am the general manager of the Optimism Foundation, and I am very excited to talk with you all today about our third round of retroactive public goods funding.
Thank you, Bobby. And next, let's have Jonas go.
What's up? I'm Jonas. I'm the RetroPGF lead at the Optimism Foundation, and I'm super stoked to ship the next round of RetroPGF.
Yes, the next round of RetroPGF, round 3. I don't think we could have two more qualified people on here to tell us about RetroPGF and specifically tell us about round 3. So let's dig right into it. RetroPGF 3, we announced yesterday, 30 million OP for builders, creators, and educators who have provided positive impact to the Optimism Collective. The way I'd like to start this, Bobby, is RetroPGF is such a big and expansive idea, and I think you're uniquely qualified to give your take on what RetroPGF is and what it means and what this big idea is. Do you want to take a crack at people who may not be familiar with the concept?
Let's do it. All right, I'm gonna rip through it. I'm gonna aim for 90 seconds. So Max, start your stopwatch. Basically, RetroPGF stands for Retroactive Public Goods Funding. So first, why the hell do we want to fund public goods? And then second, why is it retroactive? And third, why does this matter for optimism? So modern economies run on public goods. This is true in crypto. This is true outside of crypto. You can think about open source software as a really, really clear example. People build stuff for free, and every website, every app that you've ever interacted with assembles all of these free pieces like Legos to actually make a product for you. It's also true, I don't know, for the city that you live in. If you ride public transportation or visit a park, it's especially true in crypto where so much open source software is actually what helps secure and run these networks. So public goods are really freaking important, whether that is specific client software, whether that is educational materials, whether that is anything in between. And so Optimism cares about funding public goods because that is the key to building a healthy community and a successful future. So we're not funding public goods to be altruistic. We're funding public goods because that is how we build a thriving economy and a thriving ecosystem for optimism. Why is any of this retroactive? What's with the retro part of public goods funding? Well, we have this very strong hypothesis that funding public goods looking back is both easier and more accurate than funding public goods looking forward into the future. And the reason is pretty simple. Basically, if you look back at the past couple of months, it's much clearer to see what work actually helped the community accomplish something than it is to make some guess about how things will go in the next couple of months based on what you know about the project lead, what you know about the thing that they're trying to achieve, what you feel like their chances for success are. So basically, if we put those two concepts together, RetroPGF, I'm way over 90 seconds, by the way, so FML. But RetroPGF is a way for the optimism community to come together every couple months or every couple quarters and say, what was really, really helpful for the collective over the past period of time? And a group of people, citizens, badge holders, vote on projects that helped the collective thrive. And Jonas will get into the details of what it actually means to have helped the collective or provided positive impact to the collective. But it's really this basic concept that the community should be able to vote to reward people and projects that had positive impact on optimism. And so altogether, this is sort of like a fork of the traditional economy. We are trying to bake this thing in right in the way the optimism protocol works, in the way the optimism community is designed, and make this a through line, a lifeblood, a really important piece of how optimism grows and extends into the future.
Very well said, Bobby. I can tell you've been honing that pitch. And yeah, you did go over 90 seconds, but yeah, you're shortening it up every time. You did great.
More honing to do. Okay.
Well, it is, it's a difficult proposition because it is sort of a big and expansive idea. And it's also, maybe there's a few concepts people aren't quite as familiar with, like the retroactive piece. So I thought you did admirably. I'm going to shift. Oh, let's skip ahead, Bobby. And if people only listen to like the first 5 minutes of this, let's tell them how they can get involved with RetroPGF. Let's start with that.
Okay, yes, great question. The thing that I really want to drive home is that this is for everybody. It doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter what your skill set is, it doesn't matter if you're a developer or if you have 10 friends that you think you could explain what optimism is to. There are so many different ways to participate in this program. And at a very basic level, you can sit down and try to just come up with something that you think would benefit the optimism community. If you're pretty unfamiliar with the optimism community, we've got a lot of different resources that you can tap into that will help you find a project or a concept or an idea that can get you started. So I don't know if we got show notes going on here or if there's maybe like a thread that we can link to, but we've got this big GitHub repo that's full of different contributions that folks can make. Some of them are technical, some of them are non-technical, and it's a really good place to go and wrap your head around what this program is about and identify a couple of different projects that you could take on that might be eligible for retroactive public goods funding. I think Jonas will also talk a little bit about the categories that we're basing this round on that will give you a bit more specific idea of the scope of the stuff that we think is really important to support. And so that extends from, again, really technical things like client development all the way to spreading awareness of the project and helping end users understand how to use crypto and things like that.
Excellent. And for those joining this space live, I did just pin the tweet of our announcement, so you can check that out. It just showed up for me on my end. If you're listening to this episode later, though, I will throw out just a couple of links. So if you want to go to the Optimism Ideas page, that's at optimism.io/ideas. And that's a bunch of ideas. If you want to get started, but you don't know where to start, that list would be a good place to begin. And then also, I encourage you to check out the Mirror blog post that we put out yesterday at optimism.mirror.xyz. And that has all the details on this round, and that'll be up forever, theoretically. So you can go check out all of that there. I'm going to shift focus now. I think, Jonas, I want to have you get into the round 3 details, but Bobby, please chime in at any point if you have anything to add. Would love to hear from you. But Jonas, let's talk about round 3. And I want to know what distinguishes round 3 from round 2. What did we learn from round 2? How are we improving round 3? So yeah, take that wherever you want. Where do you want to begin?
Oh, maybe we start with the categories of this round.
That sounds great.
Otherwise, once you get me on like what we did in round 2 and what we're going to do in round 3, I won't stop talking, man.
Yeah, I think categories are a great place to begin. Before we talk about the categories, maybe let's explain the purpose of categories to begin with.
Yes, so that has changed a bit. In round 3, we're essentially saying all the contributions to optimism, so everything that supported the development of optimism, everything that supported the adoption of optimism, will get rewarded. And categories are really this way to provide a mental framework of what are the kind of overarching important things that help the development and adoption of optimism. And so in this round, we define 4 categories, and they're non-exclusive. So your project can be part of multiple. And they're really just helping us to, one, give a good framework of like what is important, and the other being how do we evaluate these different contributions, right? So in this idea of retroactive funding, we want to have a really, really clear model for how do we evaluate this impact? How do we evaluate these contributions? And this is also where categories can be helpful. So I
think Bobby touched on the fact that, public goods, that's quite an expansive definition. And so we're starting with this sort of narrowed scope to make it easier to categorize and define what constitutes a public good in this context for this round of retroactive public goods funding.
Yes. So one important idea to touch on here is this idea that we published from the very beginning. I think like it came out of round 1 of RetroPGF, which is impact equals profit. And the idea behind that being like the impact you make to the Optimism Collective, for the impact you make, you should be proportionally rewarded with profit. And that is kind of the North Star we're aiming for. And this also essentially gives like an expansion of the types of things we want to see funded. We're really saying like all the impact you can make in these different categories of things should be rewarded here. And in round 2, we put up this definition. We said impact equals profit. Now batch holders like vote on the projects and tell us how do we align this ratio, the strong feedback we got was like, we need better definitions and mental models of what impact means here. And this is kind of a big thing we're looking to improve in round 3, and also where the categories help us for each of these different things. We're now able to better describe how do we measure the impact of a thing. So I can maybe give an example of, we have this category of the OP stack, which is all the software that powers Optimism. And there, for instance, we're looking at like the different contributions and how do they support the technical decentralization and performance of the OP stack as like this very, very general framework for how we could evaluate the impact that was made there. And from there, we're looking to find and define with batch holders stronger frameworks for this. And we're doing this for each of the categories, which is why you see in this nice visual that we put in the tweet thread measurements for each of the overall categories. And then we're going to go deeper into how we define impact there.
Excellent. Yes. Okay. So now that we have this nice definition and the reason behind these categories, let's maybe get into the 4 categories for round 3. And Jonas, maybe I'll introduce each one and maybe you can provide a little explanation for each. How does that sound?
Yes, that sounds good.
Okay. So you already touched on the first one, which is the OP stack. This is the open source modular code base that Optimism is run on and powered by. Any further details you want to add there, Jonas?
Yes, this is really everything that underpins Optimism. So these could be also the dependencies of the OP stack. If you think of round 2, this included everything from Ethereum clients, contributions to EIP 4844. So this is really everything that Optimism depends on.
Excellent. And then moving on, let's go to collective governance is the second category.
Yes, governance contributions are important, and governance, the Token House and the Citizens House, is part of what makes Optimism possible. And there, we put this as a separate category, really because we want to see more contributions in this area. We also have under this mission intent in the Token House, governance accessibility. And so these are things that help governance run more smoothly. This could be everything from educational content. This could be better user interfaces. This could be like hosting the community calls, everything that makes participating in Optimism governance great.
Yep. And then the third one on the list, we have developer ecosystem.
Yes, we're fostering this ecosystem where people build great applications on Optimism. And there's a bunch of things and essentially a bunch of public goods that people use to make this happen. And this goes from everything from SDKs, oracles, documentation, tutorials. This could even be hackathons. Everything that helps people develop and deploy cool applications on OP mainnet and on other OP chains.
I would also add that this could even include applications built on mainnet or other chains themselves. Like, for example, if you deploy a bunch of contracts that make up an application, I don't know, we'll use Uniswap as an example, and tons of other folks are building on your contracts because they add up to something super high utility, that counts, right? Like, you're helping empower developers to build new novel applications on Optimism, and that's a really important public good for the collective. So we're encouraging people to think of this with a really broad lens and really just say, like, okay, if we think of developer growth as this like important thing for the collective to aim for, what have people built that helps drive that overall North Star? And it doesn't just have to be what we traditionally think of as these like free tools that folks are giving away. It can also be a project that someone has built where they're actually providing more impact to the collective than they are making profit, even if they're charging marginal fees on user transactions or something like that. So there's a lot of nuance to get into here. Sorry to interrupt, Jonas, but I think there's just like some exciting details that are worth calling out.
No, important clarification. Thank you for that, Bobby. And, we talked about the devs. The other side of this coin is the end user, which brings us to our fourth category, which is the end user experience and adoption. Jonas, do you want to provide us a few more details on that category?
Yes. So this is pretty much everything that makes life as a user good. And so this goes, again, from like educational resources to nice interfaces to even applications themselves that provide a lot of value to users. And so what we did here in the categorization is we really tried to see who does this, or essentially who do these contributions provide impact to. And one of the things we want to drive is things that support end users in adopting these great decentralized applications. So there's everything in there from wallets to general awareness about optimism, everything that helps people come on board and jump into Optimism land.
Fantastic. Okay, so that rounds out the 4 categories for round 3. Jonas, I wonder now if we can dive into some of the key learnings and lessons from round 2. I know you have a lot to say there as someone who is deeply embedded in this process. So maybe to kick this off, just if you were to pick, maybe 1 or 2 things, what was the biggest lesson that we got from round 2? And, we say this a lot, but it bears repeating. We approach everything in Optimism with this iterative and experimental approach. So we're always learning, improving. So I'm curious, what in your mind was the biggest takeaway from round 2?
Yes, quickly just jumping on that learning and improving train. I think this is very much an interesting approach that we're driving here. Something like RetroPGF can be this like big, expansive, complicated thing where you can spend years designing it to be perfect. And we're not trying to do this in like designing something for years and then putting it out with the expectation it's all going to work well. But we're trying to quickly iterate within these rounds, which also means we're making like tough choices in terms of where we invest our time and resources and our focus. If I had to pick one learning from round 2 that was like really, or that was like, that impacted the round a lot in its performance, I would say it's the information we gathered from projects. A really simple thing, but it made like a large impact into how this round went. So in round 2, projects signed up for RetroPGF through this form, and they answered a bunch of questions we had there. And we just didn't ask the right questions. So I think we asked questions that were very broad. And so because we didn't give that many guidelines, projects responded with like very, very general and generic answers. And this in the end blocked batch holders from doing like really good evaluation of these projects when they voted. So if you're a batch holder and you're trying to understand what a project has done and what impact a project has generated, you really want to see like some data around like if it's like developer tooling, you really want to understand like how many devs have used this and found this impactful and what difference has it made. And in the questions we asked to projects, we didn't point this out enough and didn't give enough guidance. So batch holders had to work with a lot of like more generic answers and not specific data on how impactful something was. So this is something that we're taking from round 2, which is like a really simple thing, but makes a large impact. And in round 3, with the sign up process that we're currently developing, we're hoping to provide projects with a way more pointed and higher context sign up flow, so they can tell batch holders really well what they did and how they generated impact. And batch holders will have a much better time retroactively looking back, deciding who contributed to Optimism and how to align the impact equals profit ratio.
Yeah, I find this learning very fascinating. It sort of reminds me of software development where the input determines the output. And so what Jonas is saying is that we are continuing to iterate and improve upon the information that we're gathering by asking better questions so that we can better help steward this process and move it along. So I find that really fascinating. Another thing that I wanted to emphasize that Jonas mentioned is that we're learning by doing, which in my opinion is the best way to learn something, right? Instead of just having all these ideas and they're all theoretical, we're actually doing the process. We're already on the 3rd round and they'll just continue to get better and improve as we go on.
Just to add to this, we're hoping, so we published this big, long blog post a few weeks back with the learnings and reflections on round 2. And we're hoping to really spread this learning and everything that we gather in these rounds. And so that when we continue and we do round 4 and round 5, it's this whole ecosystem of contributors and great minds thinking about how to run these RetroPGF rounds and how to design them. And it's not essentially us in isolation learning a bunch of things and keeping them to ourselves.
Yeah, like so much of what we do here, right? The coding included, it's all out in the open. It's open for discussion. It's open source. So feedback welcomed. And I think it's so cool that we provide a window by which people can glance and look into this process and actually see how we're improving it. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we direct people on how they can get involved with round 3?
One really obvious one is we're pre-announcing the round, which was actually part of the idea of doing these RetroPGF rounds. So sometimes this is a misconception I run into. We actually want people to do things because they know they will get rewarded for them retroactively. And so part of the call out here, what we're going to get to is we're announcing this now. The voting for this is going to happen in the fall of this year. And in this time you have now, you can build something and then sign up for round 3 to get rewarded for the impact this thing had. So this is like a really obvious thing. Round 2 was pretty much announced and then executed, and there wasn't like a time span between the announcement and the voting. And so this time around, we're separating this out a bit more so people can work with the expectation of this round coming. And then I think the other thing is we're improving. One thing to call is like we're improving the voting to help people share the work they do in this voting process. So in the last round, we had like 200 projects that were nominated. And so for each single voter, it seems like a really daunting task to go over 200 projects. And so this time around, we're looking to introduce some new tools. So if you're an expert in a certain field, you can share this knowledge and share how you evaluate projects easily with other badge holders. So we're moving into a world where you as a voter in the system don't have to review hundreds of projects yourself.
It's an excellent point, Jonas, and it leads nicely into a thought I had, which is one of the things I love about crypto and I love about Web3 is that anyone and everyone is free and open and indeed invited to participate. And so it's not like you have to, write a cover letter and submit a resume. We're soliciting for people to join the Optimism Collective here, and we're trying to make it as easy as possible for you to get involved by not only giving you all these ideas of projects that we think could have a really positive impact in the ecosystem, but providing these categories for you to help you better understand what might create that impact. I think maybe we have Bobby back with us. Bob, are you able to speak now?
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Loud and clear.
What happened was Twitter was like, hey, Bobby, you spent too much time on Twitter today. You are ejected now. So I got ejected. But I'm making an exception to my Twitter daily limit so that we can continue to chat. I think everything that I was trying to say, Jonas absolutely just covered. Like RetroPGF is for everyone. And if you look back at the folks who were funded in round 2, there's like this amazing breadth of contributions. Some of those things are really advanced projects. Some of those things are individual people who are educating folks on Twitter, who are hosting a podcast, who are running a local community in their own language, like Optimism Espanol, etc. So there's just like a lot of ways to get involved. And I really want to emphasize that this program is for everyone. And if you are providing impact to Optimism, you will be funded for it. So that's just like a very simple concept, but worth reiterating and trying to drive home.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just once again, this is open to anyone and everyone, which is such a powerful idea. So yeah, please take a look at the ideas list, optimism.io/ideas. Take a look at the mirror post at optimism.mirror.xyz. You'll have all the nitty-gritty details on round 3 there to help guide you. Bobby and Jonas, this has been excellent. I think we might wrap it up here soon. Keep this one short and sweet, and people can dig into this info later at their leisure. Is there anything you'd like to add before we close the space out?
Thank you for being a lovely host, Mr. Mack. It's always a pleasure, and hope to see many of these faces around the community from here on out.
Yes, thanks for having us. The only thing I would call out is if you're in doubt, if you can build something for RetroPGF, just go into this announcement article, go on the website, and you can see all the great projects that have been funded in the last round and some of their kind of testimonies of how this changed how they approach the work they do. And so this is sometimes what I come back to, because it's really, really heartwarming to see how people are changing their working style and how they get funded through these programs.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you want to get the warm and fuzzies, check out that tweet thread that I pinned here. If you're listening to this later, it's on the Optimism profile, and we have some great quotes from individuals and projects that were recipients of round 2. So always good to hear. Okay. Awesome, guys. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. I want to thank you, Bobby and Jonas, for joining us on OP Radio this week, and really looking forward to this next round of retroactive public goods funding. Always a pleasure. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everybody. We'll catch you next week. Stay optimistic.
Peace. Thank you.
Bye-bye.